Hey, in the second video we're going to talk about Hebrews. So here goes Hebrews. We really have no idea who wrote Hebrews or when. Hanks guessed that it's 65 CE and in Rome, but we really don't have any idea. It's almost certainly written to a Jewish community, a Jewish Christian community, and almost certainly written in diaspora, as was James's community. But the writer of Hebrews is probably a diaspora Jew, whereas in James's case, a writer of James reads more like he is a Palestinian Jew, or someone who's still very much in the North Africa confines of Judaism. The big issue we need to deal with Hebrews is not faith versus works, as we find in James, which is always put up against Paul as a big argument against James. In Hebrews, the issue is supersessionism, and I'm going to write that across the screen, I suspect. Supersessionism. It is the idea that somehow the covenant of Abraham was replaced as less than or not as good as the covenant of Christianity. Now, let's start with the problem with this. The problem with this is that Christianity used this as the justification for killing Jews. Not just for not stopping the Holocaust in Germany, but for starting the Inquisition in Europe. And so you had Christians using Christian theology of supersessionism to say that Judaism was an inferior religion. And we have to think critically about how we use Hebrews when we preach these texts, because we have a tendency to put down somebody else's religion just to puff up our own. That goes back to this culture of limited good, and that may not be where we are today. So we can try to think critically about this even as we use some of the most important theology in the Bible, some of the theology found in Hebrews. As I said, culturally, part of the reason why Christianity developed as supersessionist is that belief in limited good, that if there's honor here, then there can't be honor here because there's only a limited amount of honor and status to go around. And so we see this all the way through Hebrews. Moses is good, but Christ is greater. High priests are good, but Christ the high priest is greater. Melchizedek was good, but Christ as Melchizedek is greater. The covenant is good, but Christ's covenant is greater. The sanctuary on earth is good, but Christ's sanctuary is greater. Sacrifices are good, but Christ's sacrifice is greater. And it goes on, and it goes on, and goes on. Hebrews makes this argument over and over again. This is not just the limited good piece, but it is also something called Platonism. It is a review of Plato's way of thinking about the earth, where you have the earth as a copy of what's perfect in heaven. So the heavens part are perfect and good, and the earth is just this foul copy. You see this in some North African writings, what we now call Gnosticism, and you see this in some of the writings of that period, even in Philo, where what we can see is seen as not as good as what we cannot see. And so you end up with this dualism. It's dualism also that you found in Zoroastrianism, where you had the evil and the good always had to supersede the evil. So there's good cultural reasons why this came into being. The question is not why it came into being, but should we use this? And if we use this, how do we use this without becoming anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic? So there's the cultural piece that's going on in Hebrews. Ideologically, we have this question of empire and alternative empire. Again, Hebrews is doing what a lot of these texts do. It's proposing something to replace what's here. So what's here might be a temple. Hebrews is replacing this temple with that temple, this sacrifice with that sacrifice. And Hebrews is building it up as this great empire of God with angels as ministers and servants flitting here and there, flames of fire, and this Son who is this day have I begotten thee great. Now this is an imperial kind of language, and it's setting itself up against the empire of Rome and also the temple cult. This leads to the question, is this written before the destruction of the temple? In which case it would be a schismatic group that's been pushed out, and then they're saying, okay, well, we're going to be better than you are. You say we can't be part of you, but we have something greater. Or could it be a group that's reacting to Rome's domination and saying, you may have killed what you think of as our temple, but we have something greater than even what you crushed. There's no way to tell in Hebrews because there's not enough historical clues to give us the timing. But those are two ways in which that imperial language could be used by subaltern, by oppressed groups, to argue for their right to voice, their right to power. The trouble becomes when we, who have Scud missiles, take on these as our theology and say, well, you know, as folks in the United States that has this great army, we are still going to be saying ours is better than yours, ours is greater than yours, and therefore yours is inferior. And that leads to, therefore we can crush yours. Therefore, the destruction of yours does not matter. And that's where it becomes dangerous. As you probably noticed, Hebrews has a very, 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 very high Christology. Theologically, Hebrews probably has one of the highest Christologies in the entire New Testament. Jesus is higher than higher than higher. You know that whole lift Jesus higher thing? That's Hebrews. Hebrews goes higher, higher, higher. It also has a very interesting angelology. Hebrews is one of the few texts that actually talks about the nature of angels. And that's its primary pneumatology, is to talk about these flames of fire, these servants of God, flitting back and forth. The ethics of Hebrews is interesting because in all of this Jesus being greater, Jesus being greater, Jesus being greater, there is an ethics underlying all of this. And the ethics underlying all of this is to say to the community of faith, because you serve such a great Christ, hold on. Hold on, be patient, endure, you can do this. And the whole Hebrews 11 faith story, the whole, what is called the encomium on faith, this long series of by faith this one did this and by faith this one did this, that wonderful passage that begins, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. If you read that passage carefully, nobody in that passage wins. They all lose. They all completely lose. They don't get what they came for. They don't get the promise. They all die without getting what they're supposed to get. It's a call for endurance. The endurance is that until we're here, they don't get to win. Therefore, we've got to endure. We've got to be patient. We can't give up just because we're facing persecution. We've got to hang on. And so the message of Hebrews is really a message of endurance, which is why, again, we see this as a subaltern or an oppressed group trying to say, hold on in the midst of oppression. And they're doing this by building up this great big Christ to say, we're being oppressed, but the one who's behind us is even greater than the ones who are oppressing us. That's where Hebrews is really exciting stuff. But it can also be really dangerous once we stop being the oppressed and start being the oppressor. So you see what Hebrews is doing in its whole argument about Christ being higher and higher and higher and higher. And yet Hebrews reminds us that as Christians, we believe that we have a way in. Now, Hebrews talks about it in terms of a great high priest. That's a metaphor. It's not an actual reality. But Hebrews argues that, look, Christ has opened a way to God for us, a way that we wouldn't have, that we can approach without fear, without trembling, with boldness, because of who Christ was and who Christ is for us. And that's the gift of Hebrews, even in the midst of supersession. The next video will be about 1 John. I'll see you in the next video.